Throughout history, certain jobs have come with incredible dangers, often pushing workers to the limits of endurance and courage. In this video, we'll journey through time to explore 5 perilous professions that shaped the past. First up, plague doctors, the frontline fighters of medieval Europe. In the grim era of the Black Death, when the bubonic plague swept through Europe in the 14th century, society turned to a peculiar and haunting figure, the plague doctor. These individuals, clad in iron beaked masks and long robes, were tasked with treating victims of the plague, a disease that claimed millions of lives. Despite their airy presence, plague doctors were often ill equipped to combat the devastating epidemic, putting themselves in constant danger with little hope of success. The Black Death was a highly contagious and deadly disease caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. With symptoms like fever, swollen lymph nodes, and rapid death, it spread like wildfire throughout the overcrowded towns and unsanitary streets. Plague doctors were hired by towns and cities to care for the sick and record death tolls, often more as a public servant than as healers. Their distinctive clothing, including the beaked mask, served both practical and symbolic purposes. The mask's hollow beak was stuffed with herbs and spices, thought to purify the air, as miasma theory, believing diseases spread through bad air, was the prevailing medical understanding. The long robe, gloves, and boots were made of waxed fabric, meant to protect the doctor from contagion. However, these measures provided little actual defense against the fleas and bacteria that transmitted the plague. Plague doctors performed rudimentary treatments, including bloodletting and applying poultices to swollen lymph nodes. They also advised quarantine measures and carried canes to examine patients without direct contact. Yet, these efforts were largely futile. Many doctors succumbed to the plague themselves, falling victim to the disease they were trying to combat. Next, we climb into the dangerous and grimy world of chimney sweeps from the Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, the booming cities of England relied heavily on coal to fuel their growing industries and heat homes. This dependence on coal brought with it a dirty reality. Chimneys clogged with soot needed regular cleaning. The task fell to chimney sweeps, a job synonymous with danger and hardship, especially for the young boys often forced into this grim line of work. Chimney sweeps were typically boys as young as 5 or 6 years old, chosen for their small size, which allowed them to squeeze into the narrow, twisting shafts of chimneys. These children, often orphans or from impoverished families, were apprenticed to master sweeps who offered them little more than basic sustenance in exchange for grueling labor. Armed with little more than a scraping brush and their own hands, these boys would shimmy up and down soot-filled chimneys, dislodging layers of grime. The job was perilous. The soot they dislodged filled their lungs, leading to chronic respiratory diseases and what became known as soot wart, an early form of scrotal cancer caused by prolonged soot exposure. The physical toll was severe. Many suffered cuts, bruises, and burns from scraping against the rough chimney walls or accidentally coming into contact with hot flues. Tragically, some boys became trapped in the shafts and died from asphyxiation or falls. Efforts to reform the practice of chimney sweeping highlighted the harsh realities faced by workers during the Industrial Revolution. Yet, it was far from the only perilous occupation of the 19th century. While chimney sweeps battled soot and suffocating conditions, another group of laborers risked their lives on the open seas. Whalers in the 19th century faced equally grueling and dangerous challenges, driven by the demand for whale oil that powered homes and industries alike. Whalers ventured into treacherous seas to hunt some of the ocean's largest and most powerful creatures. The work was not only physically exhausting, but also life-threatening, with every voyage fraught with peril. Hunting whales was an intense process. Crews above small whaling ships would launch smaller, open boats to pursue the massive prey. Armed with only harpoons and their raw strength, whalers had to get dangerously close to the animals. Struck whales often reacted violently, thrashing their tails and flipping boats, leaving the crew vulnerable to drowning or shark attacks. After the whale was caught, hauling its enormous form back to the ship was a hazardous and physically demanding task. And once back aboard the ship, the dangers continued. Processing the whale involved stripping blubber and boiling it down into oil in large, open vats on the ship's deck. The combination of fire, boiling oil, and a rocking vessel made accidents common. Whalers often faced the perils of long voyages, including storms, icebergs, and scurvy, as they spent months or even years away from shore. In contrast to some of the other dangerous jobs discussed, whaling was a lucrative industry, with whale oil referred to as liquid gold. For many sailors, the promise of a big payday outweighed the dangers. However, overexploitation of whale populations and the rise of alternative fuels like kerosene led to the industry's decline by the late 19th century. Hey, if you're finding these stories interesting, please show your support by liking the video and subscribing. Your support really helps my small channel grow and allows me to keep sharing these incredible stories with you. As whaling's profitable days came to an end, ice cutting emerged as another dangerous profession. Before refrigeration, the task of keeping food fresh and drinks cold relied on the dangerous and grueling work of ice cutting. In the 19th century, ice cutters braved freezing temperature to harvest massive blocks of ice from frozen lakes and rivers. This physically demanding job came with substantial risks, making it one of the most hazardous occupations of the era. Ice cutters worked long hours outdoors in the heart of winter, enduring sub-zero temperatures and biting winds. Using saws, picks, and chisels, they cut massive blocks of ice from frozen surfaces. These blocks were then transported to ice houses and eventually shipped to cities or even exported globally. The work was backbreaking, requiring immense physical strength and precision to ensure the ice was properly harvested without wasting any valuable resources. The dangers of the job were always looming. Workers risked falling into icy waters if the ice beneath them cracked, leading to hypothermia or drowning. Handling heavy ice blocks presented its own hazards. A single misstep could result in severe injuries or even death from falling or crushing. Additionally, the tools used, such as large saws and axes, posed a constant threat of accidents. Despite these risks, the ice trade flourished in the 19th century, powering industries, preserving food, and providing luxury to those who could afford it. The invention of mechanical refrigeration in the late 19th and early 20th centuries eventually rendered ice cutting obsolete. However, as industries evolved, new and equally dangerous jobs emerged. One such profession that arose alongside the urbanization of the early 20th century was high-rise window cleaning. As cities grew taller, gleaming skyscrapers became symbols of progress and prosperity. Yet, maintaining their polished facades required a special breed of worker. These men performed their duties at dizzying heights, balancing on narrow ledges or makeshift scaffolds, often without any safety equipment. For them, every day on the job was a gamble with death. In an era before modern safety regulations, window cleaners relied on simple tools, buckets, sponges, and their own nerves of steel. They climbed buildings using ropes, rigs, or wooden platforms that were prone to snapping or shifting under their weight. Some cleaned windows while precariously standing on ledges no wider than a few inches, gripping the frames for balance. One wrong move, a slip of the foot, a gust of wind, or a moment of distraction could result in a fatal fall. The dangers weren't limited to falls. Impoverished equipment and unsteady scaffold posed constant hazards, and injuries were commonplace. Despite the life-threatening risks, the pay was meager and the work offered little recognition or security. Public awareness of the dangers faced by high-rise window cleaners began to grow as cities modernized. By the 20th century, safety harnesses, secure scaffolding, and stricter regulations became standard, dramatically reducing fatalities in the profession. Today, high-rise window cleaners still work in risky conditions, but modern equipment has transformed a once deadly job into a more manageable, though still nerve-wracking occupation. Looking back on these jobs from history, we can't help but marvel at the courage and determination of those who took these life-threatening roles. Their stories remind us of how far we've come, also how much people were willing to endure to keep society functioning. If you've enjoyed learning about the brave souls and dangerous jobs, check out this link. YouTube thinks it's right up your alley.